Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our awesome admins joining from all over the world. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to learn more about how admins can learn to code and why you should start writing your first trigger today. My name is Leanne Templeman. I'm your trusty admin evangelist. And if you're on the Twitters, you can find me at Leandroid. I'm joined by our Rockstar MVP and AdminWhoCodes expert, David Liu. You might know David from his many Dreamforce appearances, including the admin keynote or his website, SFDC99. We're really excited to have David on our webinar today, and in that excitement, we may mention upcoming features and functionality not yet released. As always, please make all of your purchasing decisions regarding Salesforce based on our currently available technology and not any forward-looking statements. Here at Salesforce Admins, we're a very social team. We love connecting with our awesome admin community. So you can find us on Twitter at Salesforce Admins. Remember, there's no I in admin, or with the hashtag AwesomeAdmin. If Twitter isn't your thing, we also share updates, webinars, and news on Facebook and LinkedIn. And all of our videos can be found at our YouTube channel, including this one. This webinar will be recorded, as are all of our Salesforce Admins webinars. So if you want to rewatch this webinar, or if you have to step away from your computer, the recording and slides will be posted to the page where you registered. And the recording will also be available on our YouTube channel. This webinar did fill up, so if you have fellow admins who want to tune in and learn to code, make sure to direct them to the recording. We'll be drilling into a lot of topics around why admins should learn to code and where to do it, and that means you may have some questions about the features or information we're covering. Our awesome team of experts will be answering questions on the Success Community group, Admin Webinar group, which can be found at this bit.ly. And time provided, we're going to take some of the questions at the end of the webinar. We won't be leaving any question left behind, so if we don't get to your question during the live portion of the webinar, we will be following up on questions after we end the broadcast. So what can you expect over the next 30 minutes or so? We're going to be covering some background about what it means to be an admin who codes and why you should start today, how you can get started with your first trigger, and of course, important resources and those questions from the Success Community group. So we've got a lot to cover today. Let's get started. First, I want to introduce our special guest today, David Liu. As an admin who codes myself, I had to start somewhere and get hands-on with some step-by-step instructions on how to start coding. Without a strong background in programming languages, picking up Apex was intimidating at first to me, but I met David Liu and visited his website, SFDC99, and I personally found resources and a learning path that was built in a way that made it easier and intuitive to learn. I was especially inspired by David's own background and learning path. David's not only taught thousands of admins to code on his website, but he is a 4-time MVP. He holds 17 Salesforce certifications, including the very difficult Platform Dev 2, and is a regular presenter at Dreamforce, where he continues to teach other admins how to add to their skill sets and begin coding. Hi, David.
Thank you, Leanne.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. You know, all these certifications and all these things are very nice, but I don't think they represent the real me. If you want to get to know the real me, you got to travel back a few years. I was a dreamer. You know, I just broke into the Salesforce industry. I was an accidental admin, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was a marketing major. I didn't know how to write a single line of code, and I didn't even really know what Salesforce was. But I fell in love, and I dreamed about doing so many things. I dreamed about making an impact in my company, in my career, and on my family. And you know, looking back on my journey, I took so many risks and I made so many mistakes, and I got lucky so many times to get to where I am today. But if I boil down everything that helped me in my career, and I think about the absolute best decision I ever made, well, the best decision I ever made was learning to code.
So, and I love hearing that, David. I love hearing your story and hearing, you know, your passion for learning to code and how you've passed that on to teaching others. And learning to code has clearly helped you in your career and professional development as a Salesforce technical expert. And coding has had huge implications for everyone's career path. But beginning to code does not mean that we all are going to turn around tomorrow and become full-time Salesforce developers. In fact, I often like to say, and I know you do too, that I'm an admin who codes, because with these skills, a lot of us primarily work with clicks still and not code. I personally don't spend much time writing production code from scratch, and I still consider myself an admin. But adding some of that basic code knowledge to my admin toolkit has helped me better understand the apps that I build in Salesforce, know how to ask for the right things from developers I work with, and even make small changes and modifications to Apex, Visualforce, Lightning components that I'm working with. So these are some of the benefits that we've really seen around picking up code skills, even for those of us who don't want to change career paths and become a full-time Salesforce developer.
I completely agree with that. I consider myself an admin who codes, and I actually spend less than half my time on pure development projects. So do not feel like you're missing out by being, a hybrid admin who codes.
But there are a lot of benefits for admins who add coding to their skill set, right? There's a lot of really tangible benefits for career path and progression and what you can build.
Yes, yes, yes. And the first benefit is money. Everyone always wonders about this, so we got to talk about this one first. These numbers you see on the screen here represent base salaries for admins and developers. And what you'll notice is that developers make more money than admins at every stage of their career. Now remember, developer doesn't necessarily mean that you're coding 40 hours a week. Many of these developer positions are looking for hybrids, admins who code, right? Companies are looking for people where when push comes to shove, they can write that trigger. They can update that Visualforce page. Companies want people who haven't, drawn lines in their career and are scared to tackle that code when they need to.
And coding can be super intimidating, right? Like in general, coding, especially if we didn't have a Python class in college or don't have a background in programming languages. But I've heard you say this and teach this way, that coding in Salesforce is so much different and easier than learning to pick up other programming languages. And it's a great place for admins to start learning code.
So true. So many people, they assume coding is some like deep abstract technology and that you need a computer science degree to even attempt it. In some degrees in some industries that might be true. Like if you're working on Einstein AI, that's probably true, but not when you're coding in Salesforce. When you're coding in Salesforce, you're usually coding to extend, declarative tools in Salesforce. You're not doing anything crazy. In fact, I would argue that as an admin, you've already started learning to code in Salesforce. As you've built workflow rules, as you've built process builders, you've taken big problems and broken them down into small, bite-sized, really, really simple pieces. And if you're an advanced admin and you've done things like flows, you've taken really, really big problems and broken them down into simple problems as well. This is exactly how you code. The thought process that you go through is 100% the same, whether you're doing, flows, process builders, or coding. The easy part is learning the syntax on top of this.
And you know this because you've worked with so many people who have been learning to code, right? You've got all these stories on SFDC 99, and you have a lot of success with teaching and mentoring aspiring admins who code all over a spectrum of skill sets, backgrounds, professions. I love reading the stories on your website about the people who've learned to code from you.
Yeah, most people are shocked to hear this, especially in the Salesforce world. Developers come from all sorts of backgrounds. You have sales reps, call center agents, violinists, men and women, older in age and younger in age. In fact, crazy thing is half of my Salesforce developer coworkers at Google, they don't have, formal coding backgrounds. Heck, I don't either. And if I can do it, you could do it too.
And there's a lot of benefits to adding those skill sets.
Oh man, the moment you put, any indication on your LinkedIn profile that you have developer skills, you're just gonna be bombarded with recruiter requests. You're gonna be, that one person that everyone wants to go to prom to. Like, you're literally gonna get multiple recruiters reaching out to you every day, asking for you to interview at their company. let's actually take a look at some of the numbers behind this. So there are more than twice as many jobs today for developers versus admins. Again, a lot of these jobs include, hybrid admins who code. Take a look at that growth rate. The growth rate is also almost double what it is for admins. And there are so many remote jobs for developers. If trends like these continue, life is just going to be even better than it is right now for developers.
And these numbers are so impressive. Like, there's so many Salesforce technical expert jobs out there. We see them on LinkedIn when you add skills. We see them on the job listings. And the numbers are really impressive. And many of us know, those of us who've worked in admin roles, that many admin roles have a wealth of responsibilities, a lot of hats that admins wear. And so adding coding to your skill set really opens up a lot of these developer roles to you, but also helps you expand on the responsibilities and the piece of that admin role in the market. Companies are hiring Salesforce experts across the board. In fact, Indeed.com, the job site, named Salesforce admin the number 4 job and the Salesforce developer the number 7 jobs to have in the US in 2017. So wherever you are on your learning spectrum, it's a really great time to begin or build on your Salesforce technical skills.
We are so lucky to be in this industry, really. Life is good.
And it's also a good time for all of us across the skill set to level up our skills with Lightning and for Lightning. So Lightning is a great place to build expertise and skill sets. And David, as someone who has a ton of experience with Lightning, both as a Lightning admin and developer, I know that you see this as being an area where admins who code can add a lot of value to organizations as those organizations are making the move to Lightning.
That's right. And I have a few predictions on what's going to happen to the industry, both in the short term and in the long term. So in the short term, as companies are adjusting to the new Lightning era, I think, things are generally going to stay the same. There's going to be huge demand, both for admins and developers. I also think that as companies migrate into Lightning, there might be a small bump up in the need for developers as companies transition, their old Visualforce pages and JavaScript buttons into the new Lightning functionality. Now,
this is an area, I just want to add one thing. This is an area too where being an admin who codes, even if you're not necessarily going to be responsible for all of this, responsible for Visualforce to Lightning or JavaScript buttons, having an understanding as an admin of what's going to be required and what that work looks like can be really beneficial if you're owning and managing that level up to Lightning.
Very, very true. Now, in the long term, I think admin point-and-click tools are going to become so powerful. Like, you're not going to need as many devs to do the same things that you're doing today. On the flip side, though, companies won't be doing the same things in Salesforce that they're doing today. They're going to be using, all the newer and latest technologies, Lightning components, DX, more integrations, Internet of Things. And all of those things are going to require code. So in summary, long term, I think these two factors are going to offset. And I think demand for both admins and developers is going to continue to be, just phenomenal. Now, my favorite reason for learning to code is to become a master of Salesforce. If you're like me, you obsess over Salesforce and you just want to know it inside out. You want to just become the master of it. Now, the technical architect journey and certification is the perfect embodiment of what a Salesforce master is. It's the hardest and the highest level certification you can get. In this journey, there are 9 domains, roughly 9 certifications that you need to pass in order to become an architect. And half of these certifications, the certifications we have listed on the right, half of them require coding knowledge. So basically, you cannot become a master of Salesforce unless you have coding knowledge.
And we've talked about some of the areas where learning to code expanded our abilities as admins who code. And you can take advantage of these benefits too. Everyone who's on the line, who's getting ready to start building their first trigger or start learning how to read Apex or build a Lightning component, Some of the areas where I know that I've had a benefit from is I build my apps with clicks. I live in customize, I build apps with clicks and declarative tools. But with code, I can find those areas in my apps and projects where I want to extend my automation with a trigger, or I want to add a custom component to my record page. Coding really gives me the ability to make my declarative apps even better. And I love playing with new technologies. I know many of our admins out there love getting their hands on the latest features, the latest tools, and seeing where we can add value to our apps and things that we're building for our organizations. And Salesforce is an API-first company, which means that we release APIs on a regular basis. And with code, you can get hands-on with those. You can learn about them in Trailhead, evaluate where you might want to use them for your apps. Even if you don't plan on owning or writing the production code for those, you can still start to dig in and evaluate how you might be able to use them. So, David, we did come here to learn to code, so let's go ahead and get into it and write our first trigger.
Awesome. Now let's talk about what a trigger is, just for those who may not know or have experience with them. So a trigger is the most common type of code written in Salesforce orgs, and triggers are a lot like process builders. You know, they follow this if this, do that kind of functionality. But unlike Process Builder, where you're choosing between a predefined set of actions, in Apex, you have sort of unlimited criteria and unlimited actions. You can do anything you want. You're only limited by your imagination. So now let's take a look at an actual trigger that you might see in an org. So this trigger creates a new renewal opportunity when an opportunity closes. A few things I want to say about this before we dive in. First, this is the type of thing that you can and should do with Process Builder. But for the sake of example, let's code this. The second thing I want to say about this is before we dive into this code, you really need to suppress that feeling you have deep inside that's telling you, oh my gosh, this is code, you know, I want to shut off my brain. Don't worry, you can do this. In fact, this code isn't as scary as it's trying to seem. So looking at this code, you see this next code, this is boilerplate code. What boilerplate code is, it's generally meaningless code that you're gonna copy and paste every time you write a trigger. So you can ignore this stuff, pretend it's not even there. Let's take a look at the real code. This is the real code. It's the real meat of this trigger. Take a look at it and try to understand what it's doing. The first thing you see is an if statement. This is the same kind of if statement that you use in formula fields. And what it's saying is, if the opportunity is closed, run the code within. Next, a new opportunity record. We're creating a new opportunity record and storing it in a variable we're calling renewal. Over the next 4 lines, we're setting required fields on our renewal opportunity. We're setting the name, we're setting the stage, we're setting the amount, and we're setting the close date. And then finally, on the last line, we're inserting this renewal variable, which is basically like saving it in Salesforce. If this is the first time you're seeing a trigger, no one expects you to be able to write this yourself, but really, you've seen how this trigger works. Like, I bet you surprised yourself with how much code you understand with basically 0 training. That's all there is to this trigger. If you haven't given up by now, I believe you have what it takes to learn to code.
And David, I know one of the things that was super beneficial for me when I was starting to learn triggers and starting to learn how to use them was actually taking triggers like this and trying to read them, understand what they were doing, and then in a developer org, kind of making some changes to them and starting to play with them and doing some, kind of cut and paste on triggers that existed already and get comfortable with where the pieces were, and then start writing my own triggers.
That is an excellent way to start learning to code.
So, David, it's awesome to kind of get started and figure out where we can start learning to code. And oops, where's my slide? There we go. We've got a lot of resources out there. We can't, in 30 minutes, we can't go in, it takes longer than 30 minutes to learn to code. However, this is the right place to go to learn those steps of how do you learn to code, what are the best pieces to start with in kind of safe environments. And there's a ton of resources, whether you prefer to learn in person, videos, written content. So here, David, you've shared some of your best recommendations for learning to code. We've got previous sessions from Dreamforce 2016, including sessions that David has taught. You can learn with others, and don't be afraid, admins out there, to go to your local dev user group. Or there's a lot of Salesforce user groups that do have kind of learn to code learning tracks where people get together and learn and go through online content together. That can be a great place if you enjoy learning with others. And if you can't write these all down super fast, don't worry, we will be posting all of the links on the registration page. But I also challenge everyone to get started with the Developer Beginner Trail on Trailhead. There are great resources to go through, both in the resources links on the Dev Beginner Trail, and also you'd be surprised how much you do know and you do understand about logic and how it's applied to Salesforce. If you are an admin out there, especially one, as David said, that's been working a lot with processes and workflows and formulas, don't let it intimidate you. It can feel intimidating to go into any content that's marked developer, but we got to start somewhere, and that's a great place to start. And if you're joining us at Dreamforce 17, we will have sessions for admins learning to code as well. So David also has a special gift for everyone who joined this webinar, which is his Pluralsight course, which deep dives 2.5 hours into how to begin coding. And this is something that David is providing for free for everyone on the webinar. So email David, get started learning from the AdminWhoCodes master himself, David Liu, to deep dive in and really get hands-on with writing your first trigger. And again, I challenge those of you out there, get hands-on in your developer environment, put some triggers in there, install something from the App Exchange that's unmanaged and try to play with it. You really will be surprised at how much you do know already, and it'll help you identify those areas to build on your skills. So I know that we have some questions coming from the admin community webinar group. I'm going to go ahead and pull those up. So here's a great question from Edgar. David, where do you see visual workflows fitting in the land of admins and devs?
Good question. Visual workflows are like the perfect bridge to development. With visual workflows, you can write some really complex stuff that has a lot of code-like functionality, but it does have limits. So when you hit those limits, that's generally when you want to code. This is a really long conversation. I could talk a long time about this, but yeah, if you can do it without coding, then I generally recommend visual workflows. Maybe not if you're in a super large org, because with coding you can have a little bit better performance. But generally visual workflows are awesome, and they're one of the best technologies to come into Salesforce in the past few years.
And especially I will add that I've always been a fan of visual workflows, and with Lightning, being able to add them as components to utility bar, to pages, to their own apps is like a cherry on top of what you can do with those. So another question from Tim. In your opinion, David, is creating custom controllers and views as easy as creating custom triggers?
Short answer, no. I would recommend starting with triggers. Get familiar with general coding principles in Salesforce. And then after that, jumping into the controllers and the visual force.
And another question, from Bobby on our success group. I'm fairly proficient writing triggers and test classes. My weaknesses are visual force pages and custom controllers. Where do you suggest I start to look at getting free training on those topics?
Oh man, controllers are popular today. So let's see. Definitely, have your triggers and basic Salesforce coding knowledge solid, like you do. I would actually definitely recommend Trailhead for learning that. And, I would actually recommend learning Lightning and Lightning components before Visual Force, right? That's the future. That's where Salesforce is going. and it's a new technology, so no one really knows it that well. So when you're learning it now, you could in short time, you could be one of the best at Lightning components. So
yeah, I agree. That's a great place to focus your energy right now is components. Another controllers question, right? Controllers are popular today. Jessica asked, do custom controllers come into place at all with triggers, or do they typically use the standard functionality?
So just background, custom controllers are usually like the code that runs behind the scenes on a Visualforce page, or maybe even a Lightning component. So the two don't really work together hand in hand that much, because you only really have a controller when you have a custom Visualforce page. But the general coding principles that you learn when coding triggers definitely apply to controllers. So definitely learn triggers first. Write a few triggers, at least 10 of them, I'd say, before you attempt controllers.
Oh, here's a great question that, since we have been talking about Visual Flow and Process Builder, just for clarification, we did get a question, what's the difference between Visual Flow and Process Builder?
Oh, that's a great question. I love this one. So they both run on the same engine in the background, but Process Builder is more of it's like, if this, then do that. But if that doesn't work, then do this. Like, it's basically like a super long if statement with Process Builder. But with flows, it like puts, like, it's not as linear. You can branch things out into any direction you want, and each of those branches can go into a bunch of other different directions. And you can have loops in flows. You can have SQL queries in flows. You can have variables in flows. Those things make it just so much more powerful than Process Builder. But so if you're learning, start with Process Builder. When you hit a wall with Process Builder, then start doing flows. When you hit a wall with flows, code.
That's great. That's great advice. It's good. And actually, it leads us into our next question. This is our last question. What advice would you give to a fresh graduate student who wishes to enter the Salesforce ecosystem, admin or developer side? And I will give you a leading answer to that. I know, David, you've talked a lot about how wherever you're going to spend most of your time, if it's in developer or in admin, having really strong skill sets, especially on the declarative side, which would be admin skills, is going to be beneficial whether you are going into an admin focused career path, or you want to be an admin who codes, or you want to be a developer, because all three of those do really require, if you're going to be a really strong technical expert, really require that you understand the admin side of Salesforce. Do you have anything you want to add, David?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head on that one. You cannot be a good Salesforce developer unless you are a great Salesforce admin. There's no way around that. So if you're breaking into Salesforce and you want to be a good developer, start by learning the admin side. I would definitely recommend getting certified, get admin, maybe even advanced admin. And then after that, that's when it's time to learn to code.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And thank you for those great questions. This does conclude our prepared content for the webinar. So if we didn't get to your question, don't fret. We will be going through and answering them on the Success Group. And we do want to hear from you. So please take a moment to complete a very short survey at bit.ly/AW-survey-coding. And the recording and slides from this webinar will be available at the page where you registered, which is bit.ly/coding-for-admins. Thank you so much for joining, David. And thank you, everyone on the line. And we will see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Leanne.